All right, so Logan, thanks again for joining us. I'd love to just dive in. Something I'm learning a lot about right now. I have an agency, and it's like I didn't realize how important culture was until one day an employee quit. This is about a year and a half ago, and in the exit interview, I was like, "How would you define our culture?" And he looked at me in the face, and he's like, "We don't really have a culture here." And I was shocked. I was blown away because I had poured, my heart and soul into this, and I thought that I had been kind of instilling these cultural principles that I believed in. Basically, my understanding and my takeaway is that I didn't put enough into culture, and I didn't invest in it. I didn't talk about it enough to really make it clear. And it's easy to see why companies do that now, why companies are investing so much in culture.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a really common pattern. Most of us have that kind of natural instinct where it's kind of like getting into a hot tub or something where it's like, I can tell if the water is too warm or if it's too cold. You might not necessarily be able to point specifically to why, like, oh, it's because it's 103 degrees in here, like the technical aspects of it, but you can feel it. Same thing with taste or whatever. Most people can go out to a restaurant and eat a meal and say, this is delicious. They probably can't point to the specifics of like what that chef did and the choices that chef made to kind of deliver that experience. But most people can say, wow, this is great.
Right.
Or like, oh, something tastes weird about this. I don't really think I like this. So it takes a lot of kind of awareness and education to start to figure out how to point to what is it exactly? But we do all have that sort of natural instinct or taste that we can feel it. And I think that's what a lot of people are kind of challenged with today is that most people can feel what a good culture feels like. But I think it's a lot less common to find leaders who know, right? This is exactly what I'm trying to build, and this is maybe why it's not working the way maybe I'm hoping it would work. And I think what you described is a really common pattern for a lot of organizations, especially as they start smaller. It's the founders who sort of through osmosis sort of broadcast the culture.
Right.
And the culture just sort of naturally happens through the relationship that the early team members have with the founders. And so in a sense, the culture will just kind of be an extension of that person's personality and their values and then the things that they're aiming at. And so as a team grows, the natural challenge starts to turn into, well, I have a culture that kind of is embodied in myself. How do I get that out of me so that it exists in something that other people can also connect to and relate to and be a part of, but it's not necessarily directly connected to me as the person? Because that's the whole challenge is as you scale, it's, as you start to get 20, 50, and then 100 people, they can't all be interacting with you individually.
That's it. Like as it scales, it's like, man, these things need to be systematized. I remember, we started out, we had like 3 employees, right? And it was like you said, it's kind of like through osmosis, like the culture has been passed on. And like I created policies. One was unlimited PTO. Like if you need time off, let's give that to you. I want you to feel supported here. And honestly, like there were times when I was like forcing my employees to take time off, like take a week, take 2 weeks off because you've been burnt out. You're working too hard. You're doing a great job. It's weird. We got up to 10 employees and I remember hiring this guy and he took a week off, like for 3 months in a row. He took a week off every month because we have this unlimited PTO policy and we never had that problem before, and I was like, maybe I need to either write down some defining characteristics of like who we are and how we're supporting each other here with these policies, or maybe I need to change our policies altogether. But that was like the first time when the rubber started hitting the road and the friction started being felt, and we started realizing that like when you take time off, everyone else is picking up your slack. And like, how do we create something that's like able to scale from 3 people to 10 people to 20 people to 50 people? So yeah, have you found some tricks into like how to do this, how to build this culture so that you can scale?
Yeah. So a really important principle is the principle of autonomy and what exactly that means. And so what you're describing here a little bit is like, okay, well, I wanted to give free open PTO, unlimited PTO, but then there's some people who don't use that enough, and there's some people who maybe use that too much, right? And so that turns into this game of like, well then was that a mistake and should I do something different? And so the principle to really understand is the principle of autonomy. So the joke I kind of use is that like it's actually very simple to build an autonomous vehicle. I can go into my car and I can stick a brick on the accelerator and let it fly down the street and like, hey, it's an autonomous car. It's like, well,
There you go.
yeah, it's autonomous. It's also like a danger to society, right? But it is autonomous, right? And so this is the same problem that a lot of leaders kind of find is, I opened up sort of autonomy and it wasn't safe. Like damage took place or somebody took advantage of it, right? And so the trick turns into, okay, well, I want to build as much autonomy as possible. But if I'm going to build autonomy, I need to build autonomy safely. I need to build a system that's capable of using autonomy in a way that's safe. And so you see this with, all these car companies that are trying to build autonomy. They're building into the system awareness, the ability to sense the environment, right? And so in a situation like the PTO situation, right, you have an individual who's maybe unaware. That's just one element, right? It could be they have the autonomy to take off as much PTO as possible, but are they unaware of things that are going on, why this might not be a good time to take PTO? Autonomy doesn't mean permission. It doesn't mean you get to just take it, right? And there are no consequences because we live in a universe of consequences. So there are 4 principles that you want to grow in order to safely build autonomy.
Oh, good.
I call them aim, awareness, commitments, and competency.
Oh,
right?
wow. Okay. Let's dive into those. This is great.
Okay,
Take notes, everybody.
Okay, so aim, awareness, commitments, and competency. You can think of, you have a system. This could be a vehicle or this could be a team. In order for that team to be safely qualified to take on higher levels of autonomy, you want to build like little video game levels, right? You want to build their meters in those 4 different categories. So the aim is just alignment and understanding to like the organization's aim. What are we doing?
Yeah.
What's the point of what we're doing here? And am I in alignment with that? I'm often surprised at how often leaders don't necessarily have a clear vision of what it is that we're trying to accomplish.
Wow.
And if they do have a vision, it's just something that they hold inside themselves and isn't outside of themselves that other people can access. Right. So you can kind of think of that as sort of this meter that you can kind of use to diagnose where your team is to, where it's like, do my people know what the vision is? Do I even have a good vision in the first place? We want to be the best, we want to be the fastest, or we want to make this number of revenue, right? Yeah. Those are all kind of achievement goal-oriented aims. They don't speak anything to purpose. They don't really give anybody necessarily any meaning. And so there's different ways that you can think about how to create an aim that people are going to be more excited about. An example that I think is a good example is some of these Elon Musk companies. Every year it comes out that all the highest tech talent graduating from school wants to work for SpaceX or Tesla. And the reason why is because it kind of has a purpose. It has an aim that people can be excited about.
Yeah.
I want to help transition the world to sustainable energy. That seems more exciting than I want to make a company that has a $1 trillion market cap.
Yep.
So that's a lot of things you can think about with aim. Do I have a good aim? Is it high enough quality that people are going to want to work for this beyond just simply I'm getting paid for it?
Right.
And if I do have a good vision, am I sharing that? Does it exist outside of my own head? Does it exist in a way that other people can understand it, feel it, be excited about it? That's the beginnings of a culture, is it's a group of people who are aiming at the same thing, right? And that aim, it could sit on a spectrum from like low quality to high quality.
When you're working with leaders, coming up with this, what are some of the kind of hurdles that you have to jump over, or maybe guide people through to come up with something that is compelling, that is like a high quality aim?
Yeah, there's a whole framework for kind of how this develops, and it links to kind of human development. Our own psychology kind of goes through these stages. And so to kind of give a brief overview of sort of the staircase that human psychology kind of grows through, there's 5 stages. And I, as well as other people, like to use sort of this color coordinated staircase. So you can kind of imagine a staircase ascending upwards. You've got these 5 different levels. They're red, amber, orange, green, and blue. And each one kind of represents a different way that we can kind of try to solve problems. I'm trying to summarize a kind of a complicated framework for you here, but you can think of each of them kind of like a lens that you can kind of put in front of your eyes, right? And it colors the rose-colored glasses, right? You can put on a lens that kind of colors your whole world. And so when you're thinking of, I'm aiming at something, there's a vision I'm trying to achieve, you can kind of like color tint the things you're aiming for.
Sure.
The red stage it's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where the red stage is basically all about survival, right? So I'm looking to achieve something that's going to keep myself alive, right? So you're using the red aim when you're hungry and you're like, oh, I really need to eat something right now. And you go outside and suddenly everything starts to look like, is that something I can eat or not?
Yeah.
Right. So a company will have the same sort of pattern where it's like, we need to survive, right? We need to make some money so we can continue to exist. So it goes out there and looks around and sees everything as kind of like, is that something I could consume or not? Like, can we do that work or can we do this work? And that's good because that might actually help you survive.
Yeah.
But that's not a life, right? It's not really a great way to live. Living in this world where it's like we got to do whatever we can do to stay
Saying
alive.
yes to everything. Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to like create boundaries, create kind of like a wheelhouse of specialized skills or any kind of niche.
Yeah. Yeah. And it kind of sucks. It's like I don't get to do stuff I'm excited about.
Yeah.
I got to take on whatever job it is, similar to if I'm really starving, I got to eat that. It's like,
most freelancers are in this space.
yeah. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard, but I think there's a pro and con to that frame of mind, which is that, well, when you have that aim, it's going to keep you alive, and that's good. It'll keep you around. And as it keeps you around long enough, then it builds the foundation for you to be able to start to like maybe grow and refine what your aim is, right? So the next stage is the amber stage. And so if you think from kind of an evolutionary perspective, imagine really, really early organisms that they go out into the world and they only are able to perceive things that are related to keeping themselves alive, right? Avoiding threats, having offspring, finding food to eat. And so what happens is the organism kind of eventually starts to reach a point where it's like, it might be looking at a strawberry and it's like, for generations, it's only been able to see this color red, but as its senses improve, it can kind of start to go, there's more to reality than like strawberries. Like there's these other things around them. Like what are those? And you can start to conceptualize. Maybe we'll call that like a strawberry plant. And it's like, oh, and that's a rock. Maybe this is kind of where language starts to happen. It's like you can conceptualize things that expand beyond just simply survival-based concepts. And so that introduces the ability to strategize. Now I can start to say, well, I don't need to look just for strawberries. I can go and look for strawberry plants because then I could probably find strawberries there, right? And so the amber aim is associated with this idea of conceptualizing things, finding out what other things are out here, and then sort of making sure that things fit those concepts, like fitting those defined categories. And so how this plays out is it sort of turns into this mindset of what are the standards? So with an agency, it's like, okay, first I'm going to just try to survive. But once I'm surviving, all I want to do is just be by definition, a agency.
Yeah.
So like an aim is we just want to be an agency. Well, let's look it up in the dictionary. What does an agency do? They do these things. Okay, that's our aim. Our aim is to be an agency. They have clients. They do their books, like they kind of keep the rules. And okay, like that can turn into an aim for some organizations where.
And a lot of people are trying to get to that. I think of like freelancers who grow their business. They're like trying to be like these other agencies. They maybe feel this imposter syndrome. There's reasons why for a lot of people like that is the goal that they maybe should have because maybe they don't have the skills yet to fully kind of like embody that yet. And so maybe for some people like that is their their stretch aim.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Makes sense.
That's a good point. And actually that brings up another thought is there's a idea associated with the same mindset that is you don't necessarily understand how things work yet, but you can kind of mimic it.
Yeah.
So you see this a lot with startup culture where, Mark Zuckerberg made $1 billion company by wearing a hoodie and flip-flops. Like, well, we should be wearing hoodies and flip-flops. Or like this company did really well and in their culture, they had a secret room that you could open up this, bookcase and there was a secret office behind there. So we should do that too. And like it fails to grasp what was going on there, but it sees sort of the high level aspects of it and then tries to just sort of mimic it. And so that's also associated with sort of this idea is you're kind of copying things without having a fundamental understanding of how they work.
I've seen that before happen within teams where you have like a junior person and they see how things are run or how decisions have been made, and they assume that they can also make those decisions or create them on their own. And it's like you don't know what you don't know. It's kind of what happens there. I see that a lot. Yeah. So, if you have a culture that's oriented around that mindset, you can kind of imagine how you'll get stuck. You'll get stuck in a place where it's, well, if we can't sort of open this up and explore more, then we'll get into positions where we're unable to change. And so that's what kind of the next sort of stage does. In the same way that the red stage is like very focused on survival, and then the amber stage sort of takes those amber concepts and expands them to kind of, well, there's a lot out here. There's a lot more than just survival. There's rocks and trees and sticks, and there's all kinds of things out here that we can strategize with. But amber just kind of says, and that's it. There's things out here, and they just are the way that they are, right? So what orange does is it says, well, there are things there, but what else could be here, right? Here's a rock, and here's another rock, but like this one seems to be better at like breaking open oysters or coconuts than this one. And it's like, why is that? Like there's rock can exist on like a whole spectrum of rockiness, It's like here's a low power level 2 rock, and here's like a high power level 25 rock. And if I can understand how different rocks could be better than others for different purposes, who's to stop me from saying, well, what if I took this rock and I tried to turn it into like a level 100 rock, and I could turn it into some sort of tool. I could change it to become something, right? So now you're starting to open up this mindset of like, I can actually make something that doesn't exist, a rock and a stick. And then between those two categories, you could then say, well, what about something that doesn't exist in nature, like a rock hooked to a stick? Like you don't find hammers in nature, but I can make a hammer by creating a new category. And that's sort of what the orange mindset is about. That's, I think, kind of mapped to the growth mindset, where I can make things. I can make new categories. And now that I've created a new category like a hammer, that's a whole new spectrum of like, there are weak hammers, then there are like super good hammers, then there's like jackhammers, and there's like Thor's hammer, and it's like there's a whole spectrum of like all the different kinds of hammers. And I can start to try to achieve higher levels, right? So that's what the orange mindset is all about, is saying, here's a category. I want to achieve the next level. How can we make the next level better and better? And that's an amazing mindset because it expands all the things that are possible. Yeah. So I'm curious about a couple things, because this sounds like, your typical visionary. And I say typical, but I'm curious, like how many people are at this stage that you have studied? Because it seems like it's a visionary person. It's someone who's on a cutting edge of whatever they're doing. But like, I think some people are also forced into this, and maybe they're still in like the amber, but it's almost like an orange. So when I think of like the pandemic hitting, everyone goes remote. All these companies are forced to like innovate and find, we have new ways of working, and this wasn't done before, and now things are still changing. But this is kind of like one of those examples of people having to think this way, and some were doing it before the pandemic even started, and they're probably a lot better off for it. Yeah, for sure. I think it's actually a pretty common mindset, especially today. I think this is kind of the dominant mindset that most of modern society it lives in. It's it's associated with the scientific method. Any organization that is
trying to reach the next level of anything. Last year we did 50 million. Let's try to do 60 million. It's the next level, right?
Yeah.
Sort of that ladder. Hey, if you want to change something, like, you can do that. And I think most people are at least more familiar with that way of thinking today.
Yeah, I think in the West, you're right. This takes me back. Okay, so I started out at investment banks just like you. I was more on like operations side. I wasn't doing video at the time, but I started investment banks in London. Went to Singapore. After that, I needed to get out of it. I was like not loving the spreadsheet life, working for hedge funds. And so I taught in Beijing, China at a small university. I was teaching economics 101. And we had a little like, it was like an international business club that we started. And I started talking to kids afterwards, after class, and talking to them about like, what do they want to do with their life? And 99% of them, I think there was like one student that didn't feel this way. Most of them knew what they were going to do because that's what their parents did. That's what they were told that they were going to do. It was like, I'm going to be a truck driver. I was like, well, have you ever thought about doing anything else? And they're like, no, that's what I'm doing. And it's a different culture, but I like to bring it up because it's like, it's a communist culture. It's very different from the West, but there are a lot of people who still feel that way and are kind of like limited, and they haven't experienced this kind of thinking and innovation.
Yeah. So that's a great example because it doesn't, just because one culture might start to advance and develop that way doesn't necessarily mean the entire planet's gotten there, right?
Right.
And this is the same sort of fractal repeating pattern you see at the global level as well as like in a company level. You might have one individual who's kind of got an orange mindset and he's broken through some of that, like, just because my boss says it has to be this way, like, who says it has to be that way? Like, maybe there's ways for us to experiment, right?
Yeah.
And then other people are like, I'm a project manager, and that means to like keep my head down and not to ask questions and just to do the numbers and do the things. And so like you can kind of look in the whole organization and say, as you're starting to think about, I'm trying to build a team and I'm trying to build aim alignment, different people might be here for different reasons. Right. This guy might be here because he needs to pay rent next week. He's in red, and like this person's in amber and this person's in orange. And the whole thing can kind of be a lot of different colors. And ideally what you want to do is understand the colors well enough, how to advance people into different directions, what the mechanics are that draw people into the place that they should be that's best for the organization, to kind of help in all of those different kind of ways, right? And so that you're right, at any given time globally, as well as in a team or even just as an individual, we can be in different places, kind of looking through different lenses. Yeah. Based off of what we're in. But once you get familiar with the stages, then you can start to recognize them and start to actually make a choice and say, oh, maybe I'm not thinking about this the right way. Like I got stuck kind of looking through this, through a certain perspective, and maybe that's not in my best interest. So kind of going through more of, kind of the stages there. Orange is an awesome mindset because it opens up sort of that possibility of there's lots more that we could do, and let's go discover and explore and see what could be possible. And then it kind of has a similar pattern where as you explore it more, it sort of has its own shortcomings. So the classic example is like, well, we're trying to explore what could be possible next, and like, what's better than that? Orange loves numbers. It loves to, say, well, what's better than making a car that can go 0 to 60 in 4 miles an hour, 3 miles an hour, 2 miles an hour? And it's like, half a second, and at a certain point you start to say, why are we doing this? Like, do we need a car that can go 0 to 60 in half a second? Like, you start to reach a point where there's a diminishing return curve, right? Mm-hmm. And any orange goal, you'll start to reach that point. It'll be really great at first, and then eventually you start to say it takes more and more effort to achieve this next level. Why are we doing that? And is it worth all the effort and all the resources and everything that we're doing to try to achieve that? Or should there be some sort of purpose, right? And that's some of what the green stage is about, is now you look into, through the orange stage, you've kind of expanded the whole universe with all these possible things. And the green stage kind of steps back and says, well, which of these do I like most? I might not necessarily be attracted to doing having a car that goes 0 to 60 in a second. Like that's cool, but it doesn't really get me. I just gotta take that spectrum of miles per hour or whatever and say, this one works good enough for me. Like,
Yeah.
this is what I like. Same thing with almost anything that could be made. And that sort of starts to turn into like a persona where it's like, here's the things that I enjoy. So the example I kind of use is you go to the restaurant, right? Through an orange mindset, you're going to be thinking the best meal here is like the one that gives me the most amount of food for like the least amount of money. It's a value calculation, and
Right.
you could do that when you go out to eat. I don't have to get the best value meal on the menu. I feel like sushi.
Yeah.
Like, I just want to eat something. This is what I feel like today. I want to have this thing, right? That's kind of what green is it's all about the individual persona and the natural things that they're kind of drawn to. This is called self-actualization if you're using Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like, I've discovered that I kind of am a self. I want to actualize that self. So in a team, this is, I like After Effects. I like to do animation work. It's cool. It gets me going. Mm-hmm. I want to go do a job where I get to do animation. Like, cool. That's the kind of the green mindset. This is what I like doing. I like doing this thing. And so I want to be doing something that I'm excited about. That's kind of the first 4 categories there. I don't know if that anything resonates with you with that, or if there's questions about what green is kind of about.
Well, it brings to mind this really talented woman who worked with me. She was like one of the first hires I had, and she really loved to animate. And she just kept growing her responsibilities. I had so much trust in her. Eventually, I promoted her to a post-production supervisor role, and she realized after a month or two that she wasn't spending as much time animating as she wanted to. And she, I was like, okay, I'm going to try to give you as much animation work as possible, but you've really grown into a management position where, you're going to be managing people for a good portion of your day. And she eventually decided to go off and start her own animation shop. And I was so excited for her to do that, but she seems like this kind of a green person who's like, she's not doing this just for the money. She's not doing this just because that's what she studied in college. She's realized that her passion, her life wants to be spent in After Effects doing animation, and she wasn't getting enough of that at this place. And so she, created that future for herself. And yeah, it was sad to see her go, but I couldn't have been more happy for her because, it's like someone who's really kind of outlined what is meaningful in their life. And ultimately, I hope everyone can find that.
Yeah, no, it's a journey for all of us, and each stage is really rewarding in its own way. Where it's like, ideally, it's like, I want to survive, I want to understand the world, I want to build what's possible, and then I want to enjoy the things I've built. It's like, that's all awesome, and it's helpful to think about putting each of those stages in context. So it's like each one is sort of doing the role that it needs to do to support that journey, rather than becoming kind of a distraction or a sideshow, or that's kind of like the classic Hallmark movie plot line is like the person's trying to make all the money and then they realize like, actually I'm not I'm not excited about making money. It can become a distraction to just be on that rat race trying to achieve the next level.
What is it all for? Yeah, what does it all mean?
What's the point? Yeah,
what is the point? You make it to the top and you're alone. It's like
I've got no one to share it with, like that kind of thing. So yeah, it's that's part of the human experience is our journey, kind of moving up the staircase. Yeah. So
fifth
so
stage.
that's kind of
You gotta lay it on me. What is the
Last
last
stage.
one?
Okay.
I know, and we're only on the first of these 4 different. We're gonna have to come back and do another podcast. This is great.
Yep. No, I hear you. Yeah, we'll wrap up the stages for you. I think they're important. So that's green. This is essentially the journey of a self. It exists, it needs to survive, and it grows until it becomes sort of a self. It's kind of defined, it has preferences, it has things that it likes, and now it's sort of arrived, it's actualized, it's become a self. But even that can start to kind of, just like all the other stages before it can kind of start to reach a point where it's like, is that it? So is that my purpose, is to like eat sushi when I want sushi and to satisfy all of my desires? It's like, is that where it ends? And so people find themselves wanting something more. And that's what I call meaning. And so you get into an interesting sort of overlap here where now that you've kind of arrived at becoming a self, you want to find yourself playing a significant role in something else. And this is where things get really awesome, but also kind of like counterintuitive. Because essentially what you'll start to do is you'll look outside of yourself. You know, red, amber, orange, and green are all about trying to understand what I am, what this individual system is all about. But once you start to kind of reach that edge of blue, you start to redefine what your sense of self is. And you'll start to see yourself as like, well, maybe myself expands beyond more than just the boundary of my skin. I'm a part of something else. And so you start to get this interplay between two systems. So what blue is, the easiest way I've kind of found to kind of describe it is what the feeling of blue is seeing another system and wanting it to survive. And so you can kind of think of that as it's the staircase all over again, but at a higher level. So think of it like this. You know, an example of like a sports team. Someone playing soccer. You have somebody who can be playing soccer motivated from a red aim, where it's like they come from like a dictator company and it's like, hey, you're going to play soccer for us because if you don't win, you know, when you come home, you're going to die. You know, it's like, come play soccer. They're motivated through like a red aim. You know, that can happen, right? Then you have somebody who's motivated to play soccer for the team through an amber aim, where it's like, your dad played soccer, his granddad played soccer, we come from a country that plays soccer, you play soccer because that's what we do, we play soccer. It's like, yeah, well, that's what I do too, I play soccer because that's what we do.
It's our identity,
It's our identity, our definition, right? Then you have somebody who starts to play soccer because, well, they're kind of good at it. It's like, wow, I realize that I'm pretty good at scoring goals, you know? So like, I'm going to play soccer because I'd like to win. That'd be cool. I'd like to be the best at it, right? There's a ladder of people who play soccer, and I'd like to see how far up that ladder I can go. So they're motivated through achievement. That's kind of the orange motivation. Then you have somebody who plays soccer because I like playing soccer. Like, I like this thing. It's my preference. I enjoy it. What role do I play? Like, I found this role that I like the best. I like playing forward. I like advancing on the goalie. I like trying to shoot goals and stuff. Like, this is the role that I like to play when I play soccer. So what blue does is you start to have, here's a story as an example. You're playing soccer, you're going to go play the game, you enjoy playing this position, and your goalie breaks their leg somehow on the way to the game. Now nobody can play goalie, and you're short. Everybody says, we all know that you're the next best goalie. You have a choice to say, well, do I play the role that I like the best, or do I fulfill a role that allows this team to continue its story? And the blue mindset is where you start to say, yes, this is my preference. I like this role the best, but I'll actually play a different role because I want to see this other system survive. If I don't play this role, the team stops. It disrupts. It'll stop existing. So blue is sort of this mindset where you start to say what you are, in a sense, is you have kind of evolved up the staircase to become the like pain sensor of a new body, right? And you're starting to feel, if I don't do this thing, I'm feeling the sort of threat or pain of a bigger thing that might die if I don't make certain choices, right? And so now you're starting to bring to life, it kind of starts to get kind of metaphysical here, but like you're bringing to life a thing that needs to exist, and you're sensing what it needs to exist. And that's a whole new story of a new system that's feeling like, I'm going to die if something doesn't happen. It's the soccer team. It's kind of this big super system that, it's feeling the same things, and then that whole team can go up the same staircase.
Yeah.
Are we going to survive? Are we going to be a soccer team? Are we going to be the best soccer team?
Yeah.
Are we going to do this because we love it? Are we doing this because we're part of a community?
Yeah.
Same thing, right? So the whole thing kind of starts to there are systems embedded inside of systems. So that's kind of a really fast crash course through sort of AIM.
Oh my God, I love it.
But that's some of what you're trying to do when you're trying to align AIM in a team. Is understand all those dynamics and then try to get everybody sort of oriented towards like, yeah, why am I part of this team? Am I a part of it because it's helping me achieve my revenue goals? Or am I a part of it because I like it? Or am I a part of it because it's achieving something that I believe in? I want to see that vision. I want to see that also happen, right? So a good leader will kind of present to people a vision that's good enough that people will see it and say, yeah, I like that vision. I want to see people on Mars. Like, I want to see that vision become realized. That's kind of how the whole pattern sort of like comes together.
I love it so much. And like a couple things come to me. Like one is, I don't think you can skip steps. You know, I feel like this is something that you evolve through. And it brought this story to mind. The reason I'm actually in Utah. So I started to learn to paraglide. I was living in Colorado at the time, and there's this podcast, and this guy came on the podcast, and I was listening to him. He's an instructor. He used to be a Red Bull athlete, doing all these crazy jumps, kind of at the top end of his field. Like everybody's, they're doing the riskiest stuff. They're doing the coolest stuff. They're getting paid the money to do it. Everyone's kind of looking up to this guy. On a simple routine, kind of a jump, he breaks his back, can't walk. Goes to rehab, eventually learns how to walk again, and realizes that I think he said something like, I was tired of seeing and saying, look what I can do. And I wanted to say, look what you can do. And he started a school. Now he started a nonprofit where he helps people who are disabled learn how to paraglide, people who are like paralyzed. And he was such an inspiration. Like hearing him on that podcast, I moved to Utah to learn from this guy.
Yeah.
Because I was like, this is the kind of guy I want to be around. This is the kind of guy I want to learn from. This is the kind of person I want to be. And he didn't really have to say anything to me personally. I just could tell. I could tell by, the way he aligned his life that he was living in this kind of a space. And it was powerful. It changed me, and, I obviously I want to be that kind of a person. I wonder like what it is that I have to do to become, operating just on that level. And that was the kind of vision where I was like, oh, that's hitting on something. That's hitting on something that I like, that probably aligns with this kind of an aim that you're talking about.
Yeah, totally. I think that's kind of the journey that all humans sort of want to go through. And it's kind of a map or landscape of like how to navigate that journey. So I think everybody is drawn to that, just like you're saying, where eventually we will all reach a point where we want to find meaning. And that meaning comes through being a part of something else, playing a role in something that's bigger than us. And it's like, well, what is that thing a part of, right? And so the more that we kind of try to help more organizations see that, refine their aim, it kind of turns into this whole kind of system that more and more people are participating in things that are fulfilling them. And that's essentially some of the aim that I'm aiming at. That's like why I'm making the content, right? It's like,
right.
I want to help more organizations learn how to do that so that people go to work and are feeling more excited about work and feel like it's more meaningful, right? And aren't feeling like all the ways a culture can go wrong because it's just kind of missing some of those steps in that whole journey.
Yeah. I think you're in a really great space. A lot of our clients are like struggling with client or employee retention, feeling like there's just so many options out there. It's hard to get people to buy in. And it seems like the more that we invest in this, the more we understand it ourselves, the more we can explain it to others and kind of build a framework that supports these kinds of visions and communities that people can feel really invested in. It's going to be better for everybody. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
It's exciting to think of what can happen if more of us start to kind of figure that out, What could teams be like and what could our future look like? I think it's exciting.
Man, I could keep talking to you forever, but I think we should wrap it up because this was just an amazing conversation. Can you just give me a little bit of just like explain what are you doing in the future? What's kind of like the next steps that you're taking, and where can people find you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, all the stuff that I'm working on is through kind of my business called the Elkadeo Way. So you can I have a YouTube channel where I'm putting out videos like this, and you can look up the Elkadeo Way YouTube channel, or you can go to elkadeo.com. So there's content on the YouTube channel if you're interested in this kind of stuff. Like there's more videos. I've got one going through the colors that we just talked about. that I put a lot of examples and visuals and some really cool things to make that accessible. So that'll be coming out next month or two, which will be a really cool one to look out for. So subscribe to the channel there. And then I also have a whole course, about 10 hours of content for leaders and founders called Autonomous Teams. So we talked about AIM. We've got awareness, commitments, and competency, you know, so there's a whole lot more to talk about there. So if you're in a position that you're a leader or founder of a team and you think this stuff sounds really useful or helpful, check out Autonomous Teams, which you can find on elkadeo.com.
Cool. And what is Elkadeo? Like, that's the first question that I have. Is it easy to explain?
Yeah, well, there's a video on the channel you can watch, which would be a great example, better than what I can explain here. But if you think about different experiences throughout human culture where you sort of hear a story or you see in movies, for example, this scene where it's usually a character and some sort of animal that have kind of encountered themselves either in the woods. So like you see like Harry Potter is doing this in Harry Potter 3 where there's a hippogriff and he's like reaching his hand out and the hippogriff is kind of coming and they're like, are they gonna become a team? Are they gonna touch and do this thing, or what's gonna happen? And Hiccup and How to Train Your Dragon, it's like it's God and, you know, Adam in the Sistine Chapel, where like this reaching sort of pattern. And so I started to kind of notice that pattern just sort of popping up in sort of like our collective subconscious. It's like we all sort of have seen this sort of idea of like, I'm reaching out to something outside of me. What could happen if we were able to like join up and like become a team and work together? What kind of story could come from that? And that's what I kind of just gave that pattern a name, which I call the Elkadeo. Elk/adeo, which is kind of like a Greek word for the path or the approach. So it's just sort of, how do you navigate this pattern of two separate people, two separate systems, learning how to work together as like one bigger story. And that's the Elkadeo way, is like, how do we do that?
Yeah.
How do we learn how to do more of that stuff so we can build more unified, kind of scalable organizations and human experiences? So that's kind of what the whole thing's all about.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, I'd love to learn more. We'll check that out on the Elkadeo way.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks
awesome.
again.
Yep.